The year was 2347, and humanity had been part of the Galactic Council for 80 years. But being part of something and being welcome were two very different things. The aliens looked at humans the way a king might look at a beggar who wandered into his palace. They allowed humanity to exist among the stars, but they never let them forget their place. Admiral Kung Teho had served in space for 40 years. He commanded Earth's defense fleet, which was small compared to the great armadas of the Council races. He had spent his whole career smiling politely while alien diplomats insulted his species. They called humans primitive. They called them children playing with dangerous toys. Teho smiled and nodded because that was his duty. But deep inside, a fire burned. He remembered every insult, every laugh, every time an alien turned away from him like he was nothing. On the diplomatic station called Concordia, the Galactic Council had gathered for an important summit. Representatives from 12 species filled the great halls. Their ships docked around the station like a crown of metal and light. The topic of discussion was simple. Humanity was expanding too fast. The Council wanted to stop them. Dr. Yoon Hana worked on Concordia as a xenobiologist. She studied alien life forms and helped translate between species. She was good at her job, but her true joy was not her work. Her joy was her daughter, Sarah. Sarah was 7 years old. She had curious eyes and a smile that could warm the coldest room. While her mother worked, Sora played in the safe areas of the station. The workers there loved her. The human maintenance crews would save her treats and tell her stories about Earth, a planet she had never seen. To them, she was a reminder of why they worked so far from home. She was hope in the shape of a little girl. On the third day of the summit, Sora got bored. Her mother was busy, and the play area was empty. She wandered down a corridor she had never explored before. The doors here were bigger than normal, decorated with symbols she did not understand. One door was slightly open, and Sora heard voices inside. She was a curious child. She peeked through the gap. Inside, she saw several alien figures sitting around a curved table. She recognized some of them from pictures her mother had shown her. They were important members of the Galactic Council. The one speaking was tall with silver skin and 4 eyes. His name was High Arbiter Vorin, leader of the Kaleri Dominion. Vorin was talking about humans. He spoke of a plan to sabotage human colony ships. He talked about making it look like accidents. He laughed about how easy it would be because humans were too stupid to notice. The other aliens laughed with him. Sora did not understand everything they said, but she understood enough to feel afraid. She stepped back, and her foot made a sound on the metal floor. The room went silent. Vorin turned. His 4 eyes found the gap in the door. He saw a small human child staring back at him with wide, frightened eyes. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vorin spoke in a cold, quiet voice. He told his guards to remove the contamination. He said those exact words, contamination. As if a little girl was nothing more than dirt. To be cleaned away, the guards moved fast. Sora tried to run, but she was small and they were not. They grabbed her before she could scream. They dragged her into a back room, and then they killed her. They killed a 7-year-old girl because she saw something she should not have seen. They dumped her body into the station's recycling system. They erased the security footage. They returned to their meeting as if nothing had happened. To them, nothing important had happened. She was just a human. Humans were nothing, but they made a mistake. They did not know about Park Juna. Juna was a maintenance worker. He was 32 years old and had worked on Concordia for 5 years. He was not important. He was not powerful. He was just a man who fixed broken pipes and cleaned air filters. But Junho was also careful. He had learned long ago that aliens did not value human lives, so he had set up his own backup system for the security feeds. He did not trust anyone else to keep humans safe. When the footage was erased, Junho's backup kept recording. He saw everything. He saw the guards take Sora. He saw what they did. He sat alone in his small room and watched, and he felt something break inside his chest. He sent a copy to Dr. Yoon Hana. Hana was in her laboratory when the message arrived. She had been trying to call Sora for an hour, wondering why her daughter was not answering. She opened the file, thinking it might explain where Sora was. She watched her daughter get dragged, away by aliens 3 times her size. She watched the fear in Sora's eyes. She watched the door close behind them. The recording did not show what happened next, but Hannah did not need to see it. She knew, every mother would know, the sound she made was not a scream. It was something deeper than that. It was the sound of a soul being torn in half. Workers in nearby rooms heard it and came running. They found Hannah on the floor, clutching her console, her body shaking with a grief too large for her to hold. Within an hour, the footage was on its way to Earth. Junho had sent it through every channel he could find. Official channels, unofficial channels, news networks, military command. He made sure there was no way to stop it. The galaxy was about to see what the Galactic Council had done. On Earth, it was morning when the footage arrived. By noon, every human in the solar system had seen it. By evening, every human colony across the stars was watching a little girl named Sora being dragged to her death. The aliens had made a terrible mistake. They thought humans were weak because they were patient. They thought humans were harmless because they were polite. They did not understand that patience is not the same as acceptance. They did not understand that sometimes the quietest people carry the deepest rage. Admiral Kung Taeho watched the footage in his command center. His officers stood around him in silence. When it ended, no one spoke. Taeho's face showed nothing, but his hands were shaking. 40 years of insults he had endured. 40 years of being treated like less than nothing. And now this. Now they had killed a child. He turned to his communications officer. His voice was steady, but his eyes were not. He said only 4 words. Get me the president. Across the stars, humanity was waking up. And they were angry. The United Terran government met in emergency session. Every senator, every military commander, every leader of every human colony was connected through secure channels. They had all seen the footage. They had all watched a child die. Now, they needed to decide what to do about it. President Shin Mi-rae sat at the head of the great table in the Capitol building. She was 63 years old, with gray hair and calm eyes. Before she became president, she had been a war historian. She had spent her life studying conflicts, learning how they started and how they ended. She understood violence better than most people who had never fired a weapon. She listened as her advisors argued. Some wanted immediate war. Others wanted to try diplomacy first. A few suggested patience, waiting for the right moment. Mi-rae listened to all of them, but her mind was already working on something else. She was thinking about what the Galactic Council would do next. She did not have to wait long to find out. The next day, Arbiter Vorin addressed the council. He stood before the assembled representatives and denied everything. He called the footage a fake created by human hackers. He called humanity hysterical and emotional. He said the child had died in an accident, a tragic but simple accident. Now humans were using it to cause trouble. The council voted. 11 species voted to reject any investigation, only to vote it to look into the matter. Humanity's request for justice was denied. Then came the warning. The council announced that any human military action would be seen as an attack on all council races. They reminded humanity that the council had thousands of warships, while Earth had fewer than 200. They told humans to accept reality and move on. President Mi-rae turned off the broadcast. She sat alone in her office for a long time, staring at nothing. Then she called for General Beak, Seung. NG was the head of Earth's military intelligence. He was a tall man with a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much. He entered the president's office and closed the door behind him. He did not sit down. He knew this conversation would not be a normal one. Mi-rae looked at him and asked a simple question. She asked if they had any chance against the council in a war. Sung was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that changed everything. He told her about Project Lazarus. The name meant nothing to Mi-rae. She had never heard it before. Sung explained that it was classified at the highest level, known only to a handful of people in each generation. Even most presidents never learned about it. But now, he said, it was time. He told her a story in 2089. Humanity had launched its first mission beyond the solar system. A ship called the Pioneer traveled to the outer edges of known space. On the way back, they stopped at Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, to collect ice samples. What they found changed everything humanity thought they knew about themselves. Beneath the ice of Europa, buried deep in the frozen darkness, the Pioneer's crew discovered a fleet of ships. Thousands of them. They were black as night and shaped like nothing humans had ever built. They were covered in ice that was millions of years old. Some of them were larger than cities. The crew tried to enter one of the ships. The moment a human touched the hull, the ship woke up. Lights turned on inside. Doors opened. The ship had been waiting for them. Inside, they found technology beyond human understanding. Weapons that could tear apart stars. Engines that could cross galaxies. And at the heart of each ship, they found a message. The message was written in a language that should not exist. It was ancient human language. Language from before recorded history. The ships were human. They were built by humans. But they were 40,000 years old. President Murray stared at Sung. She did not believe him. She could not believe him. But Sung was not finished. He told her to call for Elder No Desu. Desu was 112 years old, kept alive by advanced medicine. He was a former admiral, one of the last survivors of something called the First Contact War, a war that officially never happened. Desu came to the president's office in a floating chair. His body was weak, but his mind was sharp. When he saw Murray's face, he knew why he had been called. He smiled a sad, tired smile. He said he had been waiting for this day for a long time. He told her the truth. Humanity did not begin on Earth. 40,000 years ago, their ancestors lived somewhere else, somewhere far away in another part of the galaxy. They were an advanced civilization, powerful and proud, but they made enemies. An enemy so terrible that even now, Desu did not like to speak of them. He called them the Old Enemy. The Old Enemy came for humanity's ancestors. They came in numbers too large to count. They destroyed everything. The ancestors fought back, but they could not win. They could only run. They built a fleet of warships, the most powerful weapons they could create. They loaded their children onto colony ships. They fled across the void of space, searching for a place to hide. They found Earth, a small blue planet on the edge of an empty region of the galaxy. A place no one would look. They landed on Earth and destroyed their technology. They burned their records. They became primitive on purpose, hiding from an enemy that might still be hunting them. They buried their fleet on Europa, frozen in ice. Waiting for the day their children might need it again, 40,000 years passed. Humanity forgot who they were. They built civilization again from nothing. They reached for the stars again, never knowing they had come from them. And now the fleet was waiting. It had always been waiting. It was the inheritance of every human who had ever lived. President Murray sat in silence for a long time after Desu finished speaking. Her hands were trembling. Everything she knew about human history, about human identity, had just been rewritten. But one thing was clear. One thing cut through all the confusion and fear. They had weapons. They had real weapons. Weapons that could make the Galactic Council regret what they had done. She asked if the ships could be activated. Sung said yes. They had been studying the fleet for 250 years in secret. They understood how to wake them. They had always been afraid to do it because they did not know what humanity might become if they embraced that much power. But now a child was dead. Now the Council had laughed at human grief. Now there was no more room for fear. Maral stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the sky. Somewhere up there, hidden in the ice of Europa, an ancient fleet was dreaming. Waiting for the children of refugees to call them home, she made her decision. She turned to Sung and Desu. Her voice was steady and cold. She said 2 words that would change the galaxy forever. She said, "Wake them." Europa was a moon of ice and darkness. For billions of years it had circled Jupiter in silence, keeping its secrets frozen beneath its surface. Now, for the first time in 40,000 years, those secrets were about to wake up. Deep beneath the ice, in caverns carved by ancient hands, the buried fleet began to stir. Ships that had slept since before human civilization existed started to remember their purpose. Lights flickered on in empty corridors. Engines hummed with power that had waited patiently for this moment. Commander Cha Yuri stood at the entrance to the main cavern and tried not to be afraid. She was 34 years old, one of Earth's best pilots, and she had volunteered for this mission knowing it might change her forever. She had not understood what that really meant until now. The cavern stretched out before her like a cathedral built by gods. Thousands of ships hung in the darkness, held by ice that was slowly melting away. The smallest ships were the size of destroyers. The largest ones were bigger than anything humanity had ever built. They were black, smooth, and beautiful in a way that made Yuri's heart ache. They looked like they belonged to the stars themselves. At the center of the fleet hung the flagship. Its name was carved into its hull in symbols that Yuri could somehow read, even though she had never seen them before. The name was Hwanggun, which meant the God King. It was waiting for her. She could feel it calling to her like a song in her blood. Lieutenant Gong Wuzhen walked beside her. He was young, only 26, and brilliant in tactics and strategy. But right now, he looked terrified. His hands were shaking as they moved through the cavern. He asked Yuri if she really believed the stories about where these ships came from. Yuri said she did not know what she believed anymore. But she knew one thing. These ships responded to human DNA and nothing else. Researchers had tested them for 2 centuries. Alien touch meant nothing. Human touch woke them up. That was not an accident. That was design. They reached the Hwanggun. A door opened as Yuri approached, sliding apart without a sound. Inside, the ship was dark except for soft blue lights that seemed to follow her movement. She walked through corridors that felt familiar, even though she had never seen them. She walked until she reached the command center. In the center of the room was a chair. It was made of the same black material as the ship's hull, and it seemed to grow out of the floor like it was alive. Cables and tubes hung from the ceiling above it. Yuri understood. She was supposed to sit there. She was supposed to connect. She sat down. The moment her body touched the chair, the cables moved. They attached to her temples, her spine, her arms. There was a moment of cold, sharp pain, and then the universe exploded inside her mind. She saw everything. She saw the ancestors building these ships while their cities burned behind them. She saw mothers putting children on transport vessels, crying because they knew they would never see them again. She saw the fleet launching into the void, carrying the last hope of a dying civilization. She saw Earth, young and green, waiting for refugees who would forget who they were. She saw the old enemy. She saw shapes in the darkness between galaxies, hungry and patient. She understood why the ancestors had run. She understood why they had hidden, and she understood why they had left these weapons behind. A voice spoke in her mind. It was old and tired and strange, but also somehow warm. It called itself the Shepherd. It was an artificial intelligence, created by the ancestors to guide their children when they finally returned. It had been waiting for 40,000 years, dreaming of this moment. The Shepherd told Yuri about the fleet. 3,000 warships, each one carrying weapons that the Galactic Council could not imagine. Gravity lances that could crush matter into nothing. Phase cannons that passed through shields like they did not exist. Engines that could cross star systems in hours instead of weeks. The fleet was not just powerful. It was overwhelming. It was designed to fight an enemy that had destroyed civilizations across the galaxy. Compared to that enemy, the Galactic Council was nothing. They were children playing with toys. Yuri asked the Shepherd what it wanted. The Shepherd said it wanted what all parents want. It wanted its children to be safe. It wanted them to never be helpless again. It wanted them to remember who they were. Back on Earth, President Murray received word that the neural integration was successful. Commander Cha Yuri was now bonded to the Hwanggun. Other pilots were bonding to other ships across the fleet. Within days, humanity would have an armada beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. But the Galactic Council was not waiting. Their spies had detected energy spikes coming from Europa. They did not know what was happening, but they knew something was wrong. "Hi, Arbiter," Vorin called for immediate action. A peacekeeping force of 500 ships was assembled. The finest vessels from a dozen council races, armed with the best weapons their civilizations could produce. They were sent to quarantine the Sol system and find out what humanity was hiding. If necessary, they were authorized to use force. The fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system 3 weeks later. Their sensors swept the area looking for threats. At first, they found nothing unusual. Earth's small defense fleet was in orbit, just as expected. There was no sign of danger. Then, the ancient fleet appeared. 3,000 ships emerged from behind the gas giants where they had been hiding. They moved in perfect formation, a wall of black metal that stretched across space like a judgment from the gods. The council fleet stopped. Their commanders stared at their screens and did not understand what they were seeing, Commander. Cha Yuri sat in her command chair aboard the Wangoon. The neural connection let her feel every ship in her fleet like they were parts of her own body. She felt their power waiting to be released. She felt the shepherd's quiet patience. She felt the anger of 40,000 years of exile. She opened a communication channel to the council fleet. Her face appeared on their screens, calm and cold. She spoke slowly so they would understand every word. "You killed a child," she said. Her name was Yun Sora. She was 7 years old. She'd like to draw pictures and ask questions about the stars. You dragged her away and murdered her because she saw something she should not have seen. You threw her body away like garbage. She paused. The council commanders were frozen, unable to respond. The Galactic Council refused to give us justice, Yuri continued. You laughed at our grief. You threatened us with destruction. You thought we were weak because we were patient. You were wrong. She leaned forward, and her eyes burned with a fire that had waited since before human history began. We are the children of refugees who crossed the void to survive. We carry the weapons of a civilization you cannot imagine. And now you will answer for what you have done. She closed the channel. The ancient fleet opened fire. The Battle of Sol lasted 11 minutes. Every council ship was destroyed. No human vessel took any damage. When it was over, the debris of 500 alien warships drifted through space like dust in the wind. The galaxy would never be the same again. The news spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. 500 council warships destroyed in 11 minutes. No survivors. The humans had not lost a single vessel. On 100 worlds, alien leaders watched the footage captured by distant sensors. They saw the ancient fleet emerge from hiding. They saw weapons they could not understand, tear through shields and armor like they were made of paper. They saw the most powerful peacekeeping force in Council. History reduced to scattered debris in less time than it took to eat a meal. Hi. Arbiter Vorin stood in his chambers on Calaris Prime and watched the footage again and again. His 4 eyes blinked rapidly, a sign of extreme stress in his species. He had been so certain that humans were nothing. He had been so confident that killing one small child would have no consequences. Now his confidence was ashes, and he could feel fear crawling up his spine like a living thing. The Galactic Council met in emergency session. It was chaos. Representatives screamed at each other, blaming everyone except themselves. Some demanded immediate surrender. Others wanted to combine all their fleets and attack Earth before humanity could strike again. A few simply sat in silence, understanding that nothing they did would matter now. Vorin tried to take control. He reminded the Council that together, they still had tens of thousands of ships. He said that if they united, they could overwhelm even this ancient fleet through pure numbers. He begged them to stand together, but the Council was not united. 3 species announced they were leaving the Alliance immediately. They sent secret messages to Earth offering to hand over Vorin and the Kaleri Dominion in exchange for peace. They were willing to sacrifice their allies to save themselves. President Murray received these offers. She read them carefully. Then she rejected every single one. Humanity did not want partial justice. They did not want a few guilty aliens served up, while the rest pretended they were innocent. They wanted something more. They wanted the galaxy to understand that human lives had value, that harming humanity had consequences, that this would never happen again. She called Admiral Kong Tae-ho to her office. Tae-ho had waited his entire career for this moment. 40 years of patience, 40 years of swallowed pride, and now he would finally have the chance to respond. He stood before the president and listened to his orders. His face showed nothing, but inside his heart was pounding with something that was equal parts fury and joy. His mission was simple. Take a strike force to Kalaris Prime. Make the Kalari answer for what they had done before the fleet departed. There was one more passenger to add. Dr. Yoon Hana had requested to join the mission. Some officials thought it was a bad idea. They worried that a grieving mother might make emotional decisions. But President Murray approved the request. Hannah deserved to be there. She deserved to see justice done. Hannah boarded the Hwanggoon with empty eyes. She had barely slept since Sora died. When she closed her eyes, she saw her daughter's face. When she opened them, she saw the universe that had allowed her daughter to be murdered. She moved through the ship like a ghost, speaking to no one, waiting for the only thing that could give her any peace. The fleet jumped to Kalari space in a single coordinated movement. One moment, the space around Kalaris Prime was empty. The next moment, 3,000 ancient warships filled the sky. The Kalari had no warning. There was no time to run, but the Kalari did not run. They were proud people, and they chose to fight. Every warship they had, every armed vessel in their entire civilization rose to defend their homeworld. 12,000 ships formed a wall between the ancient fleet and Kalaris Prime. It was the largest military force the Kalari had ever assembled. It was not enough. Admiral Tae-ho commanded from a tactical station aboard the Hwanggoon. Commander Yuri piloted the flagship, her mind connected to the Shepherd and the entire fleet. Lieutenant Wu Jin managed targeting systems, feeding data to weapons that could destroy stars. The Battle of Kalaris Prime began at dawn over the capital city. The Kalari fought bravely. They threw everything they had at the ancient fleet. Missiles, energy weapons, suicide runs by desperate pilots. Their ships were modern and powerful by galactic standards. Against any other enemy, they would have been terrifying. Against the ancient fleet, they were insects. The gravity lances fired. Each shot created a tiny black hole that lasted for a fraction of a second. In that fraction of a second, anything nearby was crushed into nothing. Kalari ships crumpled like paper, compressed into balls smaller than a fist before the black holes faded. The phase cannons shot through shields without slowing down. Punching holes through armor like needles through cloth, the Kalari fleet died in waves. First, the outer defensive ring. Then the second line. Then the reserves. Then the personal guards of the High Arbiter himself. Ship after ship after ship, destroyed with mechanical precision. The ancient fleet moved through them like a blade through water. Commander Yuri felt each kill through her neural link. She felt no joy in it. There was no pleasure in destroying enemies who could not fight back. But there was purpose. There was meaning. A child had died. And now the universe would understand that children are not garbage to be thrown away. After 2 hours, the Kalari fleet was gone. 12,000 ships reduced to expanding clouds of debris that would orbit their world for centuries. The ancient fleet had not lost a single vessel. Not one. The Hwanggoon moved into position above the Kalari capital. Below, millions of aliens looked up at the sky and saw the black shape of their doom hanging overhead. They waited for the end. High Arbiter Vorin appeared on the communications screens. His silver skin had gone pale, almost white. His 4 eyes were wide with terror. He begged for mercy. He claimed he had never meant for the child to die. He blamed his guards, his advisors, everyone except himself. He offered money, territory, anything humanity wanted. He offered his own life if they would spare his people. Dr. Yoon Hana was brought to the bridge. She stood before the communications screen, looking at the alien who had ordered her daughter's death. Her face was as cold as the space between stars. She asked one question. Her voice was quiet, almost gentle. She asked where her daughter's body was. Vorin froze. He could not answer. The body had been recycled. There was nothing left. He opened his mouth to explain, to apologize, to beg again. Hannah closed the channel before he could speak. She turned to Admiral Tejo. She did not need to say anything. Her eyes said everything. Tejo nodded slowly. The bombardment began. But it was not the genocide the Kaleri expected. The ancient weapons were precise beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. They struck military bases, weapons factories, shipyards, and government buildings. They destroyed every symbol of Kaleri military power with surgical accuracy. The council chambers where Vorin had laughed about killing human colonists were reduced to glass craters. The civilians were not touched. The homes, the schools, the hospitals, all remained standing. When the bombardment ended, 90% of the Kaleri population was still alive, but their government was gone. Their military was gone. Their pride was gone. High Arbiter Vorin was found in the ruins of his palace, buried under rubble, still alive. He was extracted and taken aboard the Wangun in chains. Commander Yuri stood over him. She told him that humanity was not like him. They did not murder innocents. They did not throw children away like garbage. They were better than that. But they were also not weak. And they would never be treated as nothing again. Vorin would spend the rest of his life in a human prison. Alone with his memories of what he had done and what it had cost, the fleet turned and began the journey home. Behind them, Kalaris Prime was broken but alive. The Kaleri people would survive. They would rebuild. But they would never forget this day, and neither would anyone else. The reckoning was complete. 6 months had passed since the Battle of Kalaris Prime. In that time, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Everything the alien civilizations thought they knew about power and politics had been rewritten by human hands. The Galactic Council was gone. The great alliance that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years had dissolved in a matter of weeks. Some species had fled, hoping to hide in the far reaches of the galaxy, where humanity might not follow. Others had surrendered immediately, sending diplomats to Earth with offers of eternal friendship. A few had tried to fight, assembling secret fleets in hidden systems, planning to strike when humanity was not looking. Those fleets were found and destroyed before they could launch a single ship in place of the old council. President Shinmai established something new. She called it the Terran Concordat. It was not an empire, she insisted. Humanity had not fought and bled to become the same kind of tyrants who had murdered a child. The Concordat was meant to be different. The rules were simple. Every species was equal under the Concordat. Every crime against any member race would be investigated fully and punished fairly. No one would be mocked for being young or weak or different. No one would be treated as less than nothing. The strong would protect the weak, not exploit them. 3 former council races joined willingly, grateful for the chance to be part of something better. For others were forcibly demilitarized, their weapons taken away until they could prove they deserved trust. The rest watched from the edges of known space, uncertain whether humanity was a liberator or a new kind of monster. Time would tell. Humanity was patient. They had waited 40,000 years to remember who they were. They could wait a little longer for the galaxy to understand. Admiral Kong. Tejo retired from military service on a quiet spring morning. He was 71 years old, and he had given everything he had to give. He returned to Earth for the first time in decades, to a small village in the mountains where his grandmother had been born. The air was clean there, and the sky was full of stars at night. He planted a cherry tree in the village garden. It was small and young, just a sapling that would take years to grow. He planted it in memory of Yun Sora, the child whose death had changed the universe. Every spring, when the tree bloomed, people would remember her. They would remember what happened when innocence was destroyed by cruelty. They would remember what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. Tahoe visited the tree every day until he could no longer walk. Even then, his grandchildren would carry him there in his final years. He died peacefully at 93. His ashes were scattered beneath its branches. Dr. Yoon Hannah found a different path forward. For months after the war, she had been hollow, a shell of the woman she used to be. The revenge she had witnessed had not healed her. It had only reminded her that Sora was still gone and would never come back. But slowly, she began to find purpose again. President Murray asked her to become the first human ambassador to the Terran Concordat. Hannah refused at first. She did not want to talk to aliens. She did not want to shake hands with species that had stood by while her daughter was murdered. Murray understood. She told Hannah to take as much time as she needed. Months passed. Hannah spent them alone, thinking about Sora, thinking about what her daughter would have wanted. Sora had been curious. Sora had loved learning about aliens, about different worlds, and different ways of life. She had never hated anyone, even at 7 years old. She had believed that everyone could be friends if they just tried hard enough. Hannah accepted the position. She did it for Sora. She did it because her daughter would have wanted humans and aliens to live in peace. Even after everything that had happened, she carried Sora's photograph to every summit, every meeting, every negotiation. It sat on her desk wherever she went, a reminder of what had been lost and what she was fighting to build. Commander Cha Yuri remained bonded to the Hwanggun. The neural connection could not be undone, and in truth, she did not want it to be. The ship had become part of her, and she had become part of it. Through the connection, she could feel the shepherd's ancient consciousness. Patient and wise, the shepherd had much to teach her. It showed her memories from before the exile, visions of the civilization humanity's ancestors had built. They had been artists and scientists, explorers and dreamers. They had spread across thousands of worlds, creating wonders that the modern galaxy could barely imagine. And then the old enemy had come, and everything was destroyed. Yuri asked the shepherd what the old enemy was. The shepherd was silent for a long time before answering. It said the old enemy was patient. It said the old enemy was still out there, in the darkness between galaxies, waiting. The ancestors had fled to Earth, not because they had one, but because they had bought time. Time for their children to grow. Time for them to remember. Time for them to prepare. The ancient fleet was not just a weapon of revenge, the shepherd explained. It was a shield. It was meant to protect humanity when the old enemy finally came looking for the refugees who had escaped so long ago. That day was coming. The shepherd could feel it in the patterns of the stars, in the way certain signals moved through deep space. Somewhere out there, something old and hungry was beginning to stir. Yuri asked how long they had. The shepherd said it did not know. Maybe centuries, maybe less. But when the day came, humanity needed to be ready. They needed to be strong. They needed to stand together with every ally they could find. This was why the Concordat mattered. This was why humanity could not simply destroy their enemies and rule through fear. When the old enemy arrived, every species in the galaxy would need to fight together or die alone. President Murray gave her final address on the anniversary of Sora's death. She stood before the cameras in the great hall of the Terran government, with the ancient fleet visible through the windows behind her. Orbiting Earth in silent formation, she spoke of what humanity had learned. She spoke of patience and strength, of the cost of violence and the value of justice. She spoke of a little girl who had loved the stars and paid the price for being curious in a cruel universe. "We came to the stars seeking friendship," Murray said. "We were answered with contempt and blood. So we remembered who we were. We remembered that we are the children of refugees who crossed the void to survive. We carry the fire of ancestors who refused to die. And we will never, ever be victims again." She paused, letting the words settle. "But we are not conquerors. We do not wish to rule the galaxy through fear. We wish to build something better than what came before. A place where the strong protect the weak. A place where no child is murdered because she saw something she should not have seen. A place where every species, no matter how young or how small, is treated with dignity and respect." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes fierce with conviction. "This is what we offer. This is what we will build. And to any who stand in our way, to any who think they can harm our people and escape justice, we have only one thing to say. Remember the Kaleri. Remember what happens when humanity is pushed too far. And choose wisely. The broadcast ended. Across 1,000 worlds, aliens watched in silence. Some were afraid. Some were hopeful. All of them understood that the galaxy had changed forever. In the command center of the Huangun, Commander Yuri sat in her chair and watched the stars. Through her neural link, she could feel the shepherd's thoughts moving like deep currents in an ocean. "They are coming," the shepherd whispered in her mind. "The old enemy. They have begun to move again. I can feel them in the patterns of the void." Yuri closed her eyes. She thought of everything humanity had been through. The exile, the forgetting, the long climb back to the stars, the murder of a child, the awakening of ancient power. All of it had led to this moment. "How long?" she asked. "Unknown, but we have done well. Your people have remembered who they are. You have found your weapons. You have begun to build alliances. When the darkness comes, you will not face it alone." Yuri opened her eyes and looked at the fleet surrounding her. 3,000 ships, each one a monument to ancestors who had refused to surrender even when all hope was lost. "Then we'll be ready," she said quietly. "We'll be ready for whatever comes." The shepherd's presence felt like a gentle hand on her shoulder, warm despite being nothing but thought and light. "Yes," it agreed. "This time, we will be ready. And this time, we will not run." Outside, the stars burned cold and bright against the darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, something ancient began to turn its attention. Toward a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy. The story of humanity was not over. In many ways, it was just beginning.